my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel. Also consider clicking the notifications bell if you want to see when I will post a new video. Also, if you are interested in a private reading, I do readings in astrology on a variety of topics ranging from relationship readings to career to transits for 2-3 years, or solar return charts or predictions for 1 year, etc. You are free to email me at the email address that I will leave in the video description, and I can send you a pricing list and reading options and any other details that you might require. Also, I want to mention that I have started membership options on this channel, and the short of it, just to give you the short perks that you will get if you choose to join the membership section, you will get 1 extra video per month for each membership stage or tier. So for the first tier, you will get 1 extra video per month. For the second tier, you will get 2 extra videos per month, so you will have access to level 1 and level 2 videos. And for level 3 or third tier, you will get 3 extra videos per month. The level 1 and level 3 videos are going to be on a variety of topics, so basically anything related to astrology, but it will be content that is not shown on my regular usual videos, right? So this is members only exclusive content, and it can range from, tips and tricks on how to read a horoscope to, I haven't done this yet, but I plan on doing maybe members only astrological synastry for famous couples, for instance, or the analysis of famous people's horoscopes, but then I can also get into divisional charts, etc., etc. So all kinds of things. The level 1 or second tier of membership options is especially related to synastry astrology topics, meaning relationship-oriented astrology. So this could be things like how to discover which kind of partner archetype is right for you according to your horoscope, or it could be, again, different characteristics, whether you're going to have a good marriage according to your horoscope or a less than stellar marriage. But you can find more concrete examples in the lists that you will find in the video description, because I have added the playlists where you can already see all the videos that I have posted in each members section. So yeah, you can see what videos you will have access to from the ones that I have already done. But I will continue to post, like I said, 1 extra video per month for each level of membership. And in addition to that, in the members only section, you will have access to members only polls, and you will also have priority when it comes to getting your comments replied to on my channel. And you will also have stickers that basically show up next to your username that show that you are a member, and a couple of exclusive emojis. All right, so that's pretty much all the perks that you can have as a member on my channel. If you're curious, you can check the video description for more details as well, or you can click the join button under any of my videos to also see the prices, because the prices will be shown in your local currency. All right, in addition to the members only section, I also have a tarot channel, and I post there semi-regularly, and I will be linking the tarot channel in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. It's called Martine's Tarot. So if you are curious about tarot, if you're into it, maybe check out my channel, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening to this intro. And now I'm going to get straight into today's topic. Hello and welcome to another video from me. So today's topic is going to be about female friendships and the reasons I think it's so difficult for women to make friends nowadays. I'm gonna get straight into it, honestly. but I still want to issue a little bit of a forewarning in the sense that this might turn out to be a little bit of a depressing video, because I don't know if I have like strong recommendations for how you can actually overcome these issues. I mean, I have some ideas and I will share them at the end, but I don't have like a bulletproof method by which to tell you how to make friends. Basically, that's what I'm going to say from the beginning. And aside from that, yeah, I'm gonna be saying a lot of like uncomfortable shit, basically, but you're probably used to it. If you have been listening to my videos up until this point, you know that I just speak my mind. Yeah, and this is no different. So this is me talking about patterns that I have noticed and the main reasons I think it is so difficult, if not downright impossible, many times for women to make friends with other women. I should specify that I'm talking about female to female friendship, so not women who make friends with men or stuff like that. So this does tie to a subject that I thought about making a separate video on at some point. And I still might, but I'm going to give you the short of the theory that I have just to help me illustrate my points in this video. So I have slightly talked about how I think chauvinism is a form of narcissistic abuse against women. And I did consider making a separate video, like I said, at some point where I will go through point by point what I mean by that. But just the short of it is that if you know about narcissistic abuse and what it means, it's basically a system by which it's like my way or the highway. And by my way, I mean the narcissist way. So if you study, for instance, the dynamics of a family where the leader of the pack, so to speak, is a narcissist, usually it's the father figure, but not always. So if there's like one narcissistic parent, for instance, in let's say a regular nuclear family, so to speak, the rest of the members of the family have two options of coexisting with the narcissist. Either they submit to the will of the narcissist and basically spend the rest of their lives kissing the narcissist's ass and making sure that the narcissist gets all of their needs met, oftentimes at the expense of the other members of the family, or they have the option of rebelling, in which case they usually will be the targets of the narcissist's constant abuse, rage, and manipulation, and triangulation, and so on and so forth. This is also why, if you study a little bit about the dynamics, they actually even like the studies in psychology, even Dr. Ramani, for instance, who is very popular on YouTube, so I do recommend her videos because she talks a lot about narcissistic abuse. She actually has talked about this in multiple videos, along with other psychotherapists online as well, that the narcissists have like designated roles for their children, for instance, right? So if, let's say, the narcissist has two children, usually one of them is going to be at the receiving end of all of the projections of grandiosity of the narcissist, and that person usually becomes the golden child. So the golden child is basically seen as the one that is most likely going to bring the narcissist supply, either currently or later on in life. And the golden child usually becomes kind of a sacrificial lamb, in the sense that they have to sacrifice themselves and their personality and their needs in order to mold themselves to the demands of the narcissist, right? So if the narcissist says that the golden child has to be a doctor, just like they are a doctor, then the golden child has to submit. And usually the golden child is the one that tries really hard to please the narcissist. And the benefit of being the golden child is that you don't get the usual amount of abuse, right? Unless you are like kind of like an only child, in which case you probably In which case, the narcissist might switch back and forth between sometimes treating you like a golden child or sometimes treating you like the other opposite of the spectrum, which is the scapegoat. And the scapegoat is the child that rebels against the narcissist, basically, and gets punished for rebelling against the narcissist. So the scapegoat is going to be the person who constantly calls out not just the narcissist, but various unhealthy dynamics happening within that family system. In other words, the scapegoat is the person that constantly acts against the narcissist. And as a consequence, it's usually the scapegoat that is at the receiving end of most of the abuse of not just the narcissist, but the entire family of flying monkeys that the narcissist gathers and uses to triangulate the scapegoat as a way to control the scapegoat. And also the scapegoat usually becomes the scapegoat because the narcissist projects his or her self-hatred on the scapegoat. And actually, in family dynamics, you tend to notice that the scapegoat is the one that is most like the narcissist, either in physical features or in temperament, or somehow, basically one way or another reminds the narcissist of his or her or their own vulnerabilities that they can't stand to see in someone else because it reminds them of their own feelings of inferiority and inadequacy, right? So this was just like a short introduction to give you the idea, but in general, right, irrespective of whether you're talking about children or the spouse or the extended family, when there is a narcissist in the family, and usually narcissists are the people who have the most money and the most social status in a family, basically you have a society or a family system of every man for themselves, every man, woman, and child for themselves. So as a consequence of that, you cannot actually have genuine relationships in this system because everyone is out to get as much of an advantage as possible. Everyone is out to kiss the narcissist's ass as better, as well as they can in order to get the most advantages from the narcissist, right? Because the narcissist also is very clever at making sure that other people don't cooperate with one another against the narcissist. So this is why they constantly implement a strategy of divide and conquer. So for instance, when it comes to siblings in a narcissistic family, the most typical strategy is to constantly compare them to one another, especially when it comes to like the scapegoat, because usually the scapegoat is the one that is seen as most of a disappointment by the narcissist. They're going to be constantly be told that they are not as good as their siblings, that they're more of an embarrassment, so on and so forth. Or if there are no siblings, right, the child will be compared to either the narcissist when they were young, with their delusions of grandeur. So the narcissist will say things like, oh, you're such an idiot. Like when I was your age, I achieved so much more, or I was known in my school for how brilliant I was, blah, 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 blah. Or they will compare the child to their peers or their cousins or whoever the hell they can, basically in order to constantly make the child feel like they are not good enough and therefore control the child's self-esteem. And also at the same time, when it comes to, for instance, the existence of siblings, they make sure to maintain this energy of competition between siblings to make sure that they don't see the sibling as their friend or as an ally. Because again, that would potentially threaten the narcissist's position of power within that family system. Now, this is a microcosm of how narcissism plays out within a family system. But now if you try to look at it on a grander scale, you can apply the same system in, let's say, any kind of society, basically, any kind of hierarchical structure, whether you look at, let's say, the hierarchical structure within a church, within a cult, or within a organization of any kind, right? Within, let's say, a political party, within a corporation, right? So whenever you have a narcissist in power, they will implement basically exactly the same strategies of divide and conquer. They will make sure that they create a climate of nobody trusts anyone else, and everyone is constantly seeing everyone else as competition, and like they have to be on their toes. And also they make sure that they create this kind of system where people are rewarded for betraying others, right? So, for instance, I actually used to work in a company, just to give you a very concrete example. I used to work in a company where the project manager was absolutely a malignant narcissist. And this guy in question actually created this atmosphere within the office, which was about, 30, 40 people, where people would not talk to one another, but instead, whenever they could, they would rat out on other people's so-called poor performance through emails, direct emails to the manager, where they would say, so-and-so didn't do things properly. Instead of actually having, let's say, a conversation with a person who made a mistake, they would immediately go to ratting out on anyone that they perceive to be underperforming, as a way to basically showcase to the project manager, who was a piece of shit, that they are very loyal to him and therefore the company somehow, Basically, all of that was happening in the project manager's head, because in reality, he only cared about how well he could control the people underneath him. It wasn't about the company, actually, because soon after I left that company, it actually went bankrupt because, won't get into it, long story. But I wasn't surprised, because this piece of shit, among other things, hired his own brother and his own niece on twice the average salary of anyone else in that office. And his brother basically spent all day watching YouTube videos, and yet nobody seemed to care or notice, or much less, confront the person in question. Instead, on the surface, everyone was busy kissing his ass and making sure that they looked as obedient as possible. Because this person had, like I said, created a system where he made it clear that, anyone who stood against him or criticized him would be targeted by usually things like humiliation, downright in like a public setting. So, for instance, I was there when he basically yelled at a coworker and called him a retard in front of everyone, or all kinds of things like that, So as soon as someone would actually behave in a way that he found offensive or would somehow question his authority, especially when it was done in front of other people, he would make it his business to, quote, set an example, end quote, by, attacking the person in question, sometimes even threatening to fire them. I don't know if he actually went to the extent of firing them, but he would end up making such a difficult atmosphere for the person in question that many people actually ended up quitting. So just to give you an example of this is what narcissistic abuse is. This is to give you an illustration of how it plays out. And I've also said in a previous video, I think in the video where I talked about the age of Aquarius being the age of loneliness, about how totalitarian states are basically exactly like this. They are large-scale narcissistic abuse. So if you talk to anyone who has lived in a communist state, for instance, they will tell you similar stories to what I have just described previously, which is that there was usually a totalitarian system by which everyone was being monitored all the time. People were being encouraged to rat out on one another. So the people who would rat out on others would be given perks by the governing powers because they were seen as, loyal to the state and the communist agenda. Whereas the people who did not play along, or of course, much worse, the people who actually did anything to be perceived as an attack on the Communist Party and their agenda, were actively targeted, sometimes even to the extent of disappearing in the night. And usually it would they would even actually target not just them, but they would target extended family of that person, right? So there were cases, for instance, of people who defected during communism, because I come from a former communist state. I actually thought again about doing a separate video about how totalitarian plays out and how what ends up happening in a communist state. So again, if you're interested in that, maybe comment in the comment section. But in any case, what happens is, like, for instance, what happened, for instance, one of the things that happened in the communist, during the communist times was that if they decided that, someone defected, meaning they actually ran away, because if, as you may know, in communist states, they usually shut down the borders and you can't leave unless you are a high up ranking whatever in the Communist Party, and they will allow you to get out to travel. But in most cases, they don't let you get out because they know that most people will not come back. So what happened was, when there was a case when someone would escape, they would target the remaining family. So I know a case of, for instance, a woman who was a high school professor. I don't even know what she was teaching exactly. I think literature, history, something like that. And because her family members, I think her sister or someone in her family, her sister or her parents, basically escaped, defected to a foreign country, they basically fired her and reduced her to a kind of a janitor within the school, because she was deemed to have unhealthy origins, quote unquote, and therefore was not worthy of being a teacher and teaching young minds, because she would potentially pollute them with the wrong ideas. So this is just a minor example. Sometimes they would actually go to the extent of, like, I don't know if about actual murders. I don't personally know of any cases like that, but they would find different ways to basically persecute the people that were connected, even just connected, mildly, to someone who was deemed a problem for the Communist Party, either through defection or something else, maybe even as minor as getting drunk and cracking a joke at the expense of the Communist Party could get you branded an enemy of the state somehow. So this is just a parenthesis, again, to help you understand what I mean by narcissistic abuse. And ultimately, the purpose of any narcissistic system, a purpose of any totalitarian system, as the word suggests, is to basically make sure that a handful of people stay in power. They grab all the power and they maintain the power at the expense of others, and usually the majority, right? So what I mean when I say that chauvinism is basically narcissistic abuse directed at women is that literally men collectively, for most of human history, and even nowadays in many societies, I would actually say in all societies, because here's the thing, we may have countries that on the surface are feminist and respect women's rights, but there is no country on earth that is 100% fair towards women, and where you won't find men that are chauvinistic and ready to implement these strategies of narcissistic abuse that I'm talking about. So the strategies that men have employed against women for most of human history are similar to the strategies that the Communist Party have employed against all of their citizens, which is to, first of all, gaslight women, So let me give an example. Again, I did say that I was going to do maybe a more in-depth video, but I still have to go through some main points just to illustrate what I'm talking about. So for instance, let's say gaslighting is what you see happening online on a regular basis, where MGTOW channels or, any kind of like anti-feminist channels out there will systematically ignore any kind of evidence that contradicts their agenda. So, for instance, I've watched just randomly a few of these like anti-feminist videos that, for instance, will invite women who do OnlyFans for a living, or they will invite all kinds of women that are obviously meant to support their agenda, which is to show that somehow women are, not intelligent, and that really what feminism has achieved is to glorify prostitution one way or another. as if to say that that's all women have achieved, while systematically ignoring all the women out there who are making a living by doing things that are very useful and very meaningful in their lives, like women who are engineers, doctors, politicians, I mean, you name it, firefighters, even women in the military in many cases. So they systematically ignore the evidence that would contradict their agenda to show that somehow women are lower mammals that were given human rights by mistake, while systematically actually showcasing the cases that support their agenda, which are very one-sided. It's kind of like selectively choosing only one side of the truth that is convenient for you to look at. Another form of gaslighting that you may have to deal with, I mean, if you've ever had an encounter with a chauvinist, is that so this is something that even I have experienced to some extent, where if you try to have an argument with a chauvinist and you try to prove something logically, they will systematically gaslight you and they will systematically block anything that you have to say, no matter how rational it may be, no matter how logical your arguments may be. They will systematically ignore them because they're not interested in actually hearing your argument. And what they're really interested in is just to annoy the crap out of you and basically get you to such a state of exasperation and exhaustion that you will just give up the argument altogether and they get the upper hand. You see this, for instance, with communists who basically think that, if they keep repeating that 1 + 1 = 3, they think that eventually it will just become the truth, right? So if you're a woman who, and I've actually, again, I'm not kidding, I've actually seen this happening firsthand, and I've also been sort of a victim of this kind of mentality in some places where it's like you could, if you're dealing with a chauvinist as a woman, you could be filling up a whiteboard with mathematical proofs that are perfectly, enunciated, perfectly written, and the narcissist will still sit there and be like, yeah, you're full of shit. Like, you make no sense. I don't see what your point is here. So that's a prime example of gaslighting. And men have used this against women in one way or another for most of human history, systematically, right? So they systematically ignore the fact that a lot of women are smarter than they are, basically, one way or another. Just one example. So gaslighting is one thing. Another thing is, of course, my favorite, and this is the main topic that I want to get to with respect to the subject of my video, the divide and conquer topic. I've also talked about this a little bit in the video that I did on pretty privilege, and I mentioned there how the so-called pretty privilege is something that actually supports chauvinism. This idea that, women who are pretty have some kind of a special status. And also the women who actually buy into this, who are actually pretty and they start acting superior, they're basically playing the cards in favor of the chauvinists of the world, because the chauvinists of the world love to see women fighting with one another for all kinds of bullshit reasons, right? They don't want to see women standing united against discrimination and chauvinism and whatnot, because, again, just as the average narcissist doesn't want to see people banding together against them, men don't want to see women gaining power, because if women would start to stay united, they would gain more power in society, and you're seeing this happening already in many situations. It's just that it's a slow process because, again, unfortunately, a lot of women allow themselves to be manipulated by the media, which, let's not forget, is predominantly run by men still. They allow themselves to be manipulated, to be gaslit, and a lot of the times it's also because women still don't have power in society to the extent that men have, right? So if you're like a woman born in a very bad financial situation, unfortunately, a lot of the times you're in a situation of beggars can't be choosers. So if you have like limited options to lift yourself out of poverty, and one of the only means you have is by impressing the men around you, like marrying up or something like that, unfortunately, it's very easy to fall into the pitfall of, playing along with chauvinist ideals, like becoming a trad wife and God knows what. I've also, I'm not going to get too much into this. Again, I have said that I will do a more in-depth video where I talk about how chauvinism is narcissistic abuse, because it's something that I could probably talk about for a very long time. But this is the main thing that I want to say. So the reason why, in my opinion, it's so difficult for women to have friends, not just today, right? Because I think a lot of people are thinking, well, it's just a modern problem, right? Because of social media, whatever. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do think that it's something that has been made worse by social media and all this stuff. But I think the issue of women making female friends has always been a delicate topic, like for most of human history. I think about, my mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, and what I have noticed especially is that the prettier women are, the harder it is for them to have like genuine female friendships. And if you ask me personally, I think one of the main reasons for this is because, number one, women don't have any self-standing power. And number two and number one kind of feed into one another, is that they're being brainwashed by society and by the men around them that they should prioritize a male's approval above other women's approval in society, or that it's like they're in a position of beggars can't be choosers, right? And unfortunately, like I said, for most of human history, women were actually in this kind of a position of beggars can't be choosers, right? If you look at it for most of human history, just as hypergamy, and again, I did a video separately on hypergamy, women had no power in society unless they manipulated a man into giving them what they wanted. And because of that, women had to be ruthlessly competitive with one another, right? Just as you see happening in a narcissistic society, right? If you live in a society where nobody gives a fuck about your needs and you have to fight tooth and nail to get even a small fraction of what you need, what you need in your life, then you're probably going to become very ruthless, and you're going to get to the point where you see everyone as competition, and to a large extent, this happens in a narcissistic society to everyone. But when it comes to the topic of how women behave, especially as a group, it's even more so obvious, I think, and has been for most of human history, again, because women were treated like lower mammals. They didn't have any power in and of themselves for most of human history, so their survival depended on manipulating a man in order to survive. And they were, on top of that, basically evaluated based on things that were very unfair, like physical attractiveness, like how young they are, how big their breasts were, all this all this like pointless bullshit. And to a large extent, if you actually look at it, at least from the perspective of just what the dating market is, things haven't really changed that much, right? And in fact, if anything, I would say that nowadays, despite feminism, in many situations, it's actually become more narcissistic, especially when you look at it from the dating market perspective, because at least, let's say 100 years ago, divorce was very unlikely, and women had the support of their family systems and the support of a traditional society that to a large extent at least acknowledged their very basic biological needs for security and so on. So if a man would promise to marry you, let's say in the 1900s, the chances of that marriage ending in divorce were very, very unlikely. Right? So even if the man would, let's say, become unfaithful or whatever, he was still obligated by society, by social pressure, and by the law sometimes to take care of his wife financially. But what you have nowadays is literally no security whatsoever. So now it's like divorce rates are something like, 1 in 3 marriages or something like that in a lot of places in the West. And it keeps getting higher. I don't know. It probably fluctuates. So the issue is that a lot of women don't have security. So because of that, they have to become more ruthlessly competitive, right? So you see a lot of cases nowadays of like husbands leaving their wives for someone else, or so it's like it's no longer even the fact that you are married, let's say, as a woman gives you that minimal sense of security that you're actually going to be taken care of, that you're going to get your needs met in a relationship, and yeah, at least you're going to be given some basic level of security. And while at the same time you also have more feminist societies that allow women to make a living, in many places, women are still severely discriminated against. So, like, a woman on her own is still going to have a much harder life than a woman who is attached to a man, either because she's going to be seen as, you know, like a second-class citizen, or sometimes she might be more vulnerable in a very real physical sense with respect to worrying about her safety, depending on where she lives in the world. Or at the very least, she just has to worry about finances a lot more, right? Because, like, one person having an income is not the same level of security of two people having an income. And on top of that, women are still being paid less for doing the same work as a man, right? So, to a large extent, there is a lot of, like, ruthless competition happening for men as a resource. That's one aspect. But at the same time, and, you know, again, they kind of feed into one another, women are being brainwashed and they're being systematically pitted against one another by the media, by especially social media, and all of these basically male-dominated views of, like, you know, for instance, just the fact that women are being valued on their physical appearance, which, by the way, comes from men, right? I mean, the reason why women are valued based on physical appearance is because men still have more power in society than women. Once women gain more power in society, things might actually change. And you're actually seeing things change already, because there are already men who are wising up and realizing that physical attractiveness is not the main thing that a woman can bring to the table. But unfortunately, in most places in the world, it's still kind of seen that, you know, women are being valued based on physical appearance, which again is a very unfair criteria, you know? And I'm not just talking about attractiveness here. I'm talking about the fact that for a woman, it's like her entire overall worth and value as a human being is being attached to her physical attractiveness, you know? So again, this kind of unfair behavior is, again, a form of narcissistic abuse, right? If you live in a society that is not reasonable towards you and your needs, you have no choice but to become ruthless and unempathetic, not only towards your competition, but towards anyone in order to get what you need, basically, right? So this is kind of like the main gist of it, and there are many ramifications in many different ways in which I can say that women are being subjected to narcissistic abuse. But these are like the main ideas, you know, the fact that men still kind of like bully women into thinking that their only sense of self-worth should be coming from beauty. And when you think about it, again, when you break it down from the perspective of biological reality and instinct and all that, the reason why women still buy into the lie that physical attractiveness is somehow a measure of their absolute value is because the world is still very unsafe towards women, and because women don't have power in society. Because if you had like 50% of the power in any country being run by women, and women didn't have to worry for their safety, and women knew that if they worked hard, they would actually reach a position of seniority within a company and would reach a life of financial comfort and security and safety and all that, then they wouldn't really care that much about whether they got a husband or not, because it wouldn't be a question of, survival. Husband or a partner, let me not just say marriage, but, a partner, right? And the reason why beauty is still seen as kind of like this big thing is because, unfortunately, in most of society today, women are still seen as more valuable, number one, if they're attached to a man, right? Because, again, most of the power structures are run by men. So men decide, women are only important as long as they fuck them. Like, pardon my French. So they reinforce this brainwashing because it's very convenient for them. It's more convenient for them to have a bunch of like insecure women who are killing themselves and sometimes one another through cosmetic procedures and all kinds of ridiculous competitions. And it's more convenient for them than to have, women who actually have a deeper sense of self-esteem and who actually build their skills and their knowledge and all this stuff, and actually build real confidence based on their own abilities and their own values. And because most of society is kind of like set up against women, they become very ruthless against one another. It's pretty obvious to me, you know? And I've actually seen this, and I was thinking about this like in recent history, and again, I'm going to be ruffling some feathers here, but you see this especially when you see women who live in so-called more traditional societies where chauvinism is rampant, and it's even more emphasized than in an average Western society. So for instance, when you come across like women from Muslim backgrounds, you will often see that they are even more ruthlessly competitive with other women than women from the West. And again, open your eyes and look around, all right? May not be true for everyone. I think the only exceptions that I can think about are women from Muslim countries that are raised in the West, and, you know, already for 2-3 generations, their mothers have been working and all this stuff, so they don't come from like this very hyper-traditionalist, oppressive environment where women are being reduced to house pets, basically, and everything, and their value is basically determined by the men in the family, and the men in the family say that, you know, if you don't learn to be the perfect obedient pet, then you are not worthy of anything, and you're not going to get your needs met. And you actually see this a lot. Like, if you open your eyes, like, the more chauvinistic an environment is, it could be like in Muslim environments, it could be like, say, in Jehovah's Witnesses, or even hyper-religious, any kind of religious background, usually, because all of the Abrahamic religions are inherently chauvinistic. So all of the religious background, all of these religious communities basically teach women to only value themselves through what a man tells them that their value is. You know, like, what if a man says that you're young and attractive and desirable, then your self-esteem should be high. And if you don't get a man's approval, it doesn't matter how much money you can make through your own efforts or how talented or intelligent you are, because if a man doesn't tell you that you are worthy of something, then you're not worthy of something, you know what I mean? So, yeah, if you open your eyes, you will see that if women are raised in these environments where their mothers are traditional housewives or whatever, they will actually become even more catty and more narcissistic, because they learn to become hyper competitive with other women and see men as the source of their livelihood, right? And again, it's not just the fact that women see the men as a source of their livelihood, but also the fact that they're being judged based on very shallow, pointless criteria, which are determined by these men in question, like how young they are, how big their boobs are, you know, how pretty their faces are. Basically, to a large extent, these are criteria that the woman has no control over, right? So this is what narcissism is. This is the definition of narcissistic abuse. Basically, being constantly judged and criticized based on things that you have no control over, that you can't really judge, you know, you can't really change, or to a large extent, you can't even improve, you know. You can't improve past a certain point. I know that people are going to say, well, you can work on your looks and all that shit. Yeah, but to a large extent, you can't. You can't really change your appearance or your features, you know. So because of this, because women are treated ruthlessly by oftentimes the men in power in their societies, they become ruthless towards one another, basically. Like, I was recently watching this woman, Sadia Khan. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, but she appears to be everywhere on YouTube recently, for a while now. And I remember watching a video where, first of all, she praised Andrew Tate, and I had to, like, throw up in my mouth a little bit. But aside from that, she had a video where she, and by the way, she's very beautiful, don't get me wrong, but she obviously had work done. And she also mentioned in a video that, you know, I remember watching an interview with her. It was actually her and another woman, where she was talking about how she had very bad relationships with women, that a lot of women were catty towards her, and that she couldn't trust them and all this stuff, and that she actually had a lot of relationships that were good, that were better, at least, with men, she said. But it doesn't surprise me that she would actually say that, because she also mentioned in another video that she's from Pakistan, which is a notoriously chauvinistic country. Some years ago, there was a case in Pakistan where this young, beautiful woman was basically murdered in her dorm room because she was into modeling, and men in that country are so jealous and hateful towards women that they couldn't stand the idea that this very beautiful, I mean, I'm trying to explain their psychology here. I'm not telling you what their official reasons were. But, on the official side, it was like something like, they were criticizing this woman because she was not traditional, according to their religion, because Pakistan is predominantly Muslim. And this woman, who, by the way, did not even expose herself in any, provocative manner, at least not when she was studying at the dorm room, and she was a very bright student studying medicine, but she was murdered by a bunch of men in her dorm room because, no doubt, they were jealous that they couldn't get into her pants, and she was a very beautiful young woman, and she actually looked a lot like Aishwarya Rai in some way. Like, she had these very pretty blue eyes. I don't remember what her name was, but it was like this big thing that I remember reading about. So in any case, Pakistan, like any other Muslim country, and I don't give a shit how people will, criticize me or anything, they all hate women. They all have no respect for women. And they reinforce, I was watching, actually, just to give you another example, I watched some documentary ages ago about the Ottoman Empire, which was predating modern Turkey, and you should have seen the crap that these women were doing to one another. Like, these women who were like part of the harem of the Sultan and all this shit. The crap that they would pull, not just towards one another, but towards the men around them, was like, it was stuff that would make the Italian mafia look like little children. I remember watching this documentary about the head concubine of some sultan who had her own son murdered because her position was threatened in that empire. So my point is that the more women live in a society that oppresses their rights and their freedoms and all this shit, the more ruthless they become, especially towards one another, right? Because in a chauvinistic environment, men only care about who the prettiest women are, because they don't care. They see women as just sexual objects to be exploited. So they only care about who's the hottest woman. And on top of that, women are discriminated against. So they're not allowed to gain money, power, society. Sometimes they can't even have families unless they marry some guy and, learn to kiss his ass. So again, the more discriminatory society is, the more ruthless they become. This is pretty much what I'm trying to say. And also, yeah, that's what I was going to say about Saidia Khan. It does not surprise me that she would say that she would say that she had bad relationships with women if she comes from this kind of a culture that, where women are constantly pitted against one another about who is the prettiest, and that, the one who is the prettiest gets the rich husband and the other one gets tossed to the sidelines and becomes invisible. Because again, in a country where the men make the rules and decide a woman's worth, you don't have a voice in that situation. You don't have any worth as a full human being, because men will only value you based on how hot you are and how much they want to get into your pants. And also, the more manipulative they become, of course. Whenever you look at these societies that are so-called traditional, meaning they have traditional gender roles where the women have to kiss the man's asses in order to get money and resources, and men abuse women for fun, you usually see that women in these cultures are extremely manipulative. They learn to lie as if it's their second nature, right? Because, you have to lie. It's like if your entire survival depends on faking orgasms and telling a man how wonderful he is, you can't afford to speak the truth, right? If your survival depends on that bullshit. So, I'm really, as you can tell, I've really let it all out in this video. So, I should have apologized in advance for the foul language, but yeah, I know. Sorry. Happy Easter, by the way. I'm Orthodox, so our Easter is going to be in May, so yeah. But the bottom line is the reason why women have a hard time making friends is to a large extent because of the way that they were treated traditionally and the way that they are still being treated by men today and by the men ruled media, whether it's social media or any other forms of media that constantly emphasizes, the hottest women, the ones who show their butt cheeks on camera and tell, basically, one way or another, tell women that, if you don't have perfect butt cheeks or whatever other physical characteristics, that you are less worthy, that you are not as valuable, that you are not as, I don't know, worthy of being listened to, or basically it's like somehow like your entire value somehow is attacked by not being attractive according to the measures of men. And because of that, women are being turned against one another. But see, here's my one solution to this. My one solution to this is becoming first and foremost self-aware. Learn to understand who the enemy is. Because from my perspective, I don't think it's that, that women are each other's enemy. I think it's men actually that are pitting women against one another. But it's such an institutionalized, it's such a deeply rooted problem that a lot of the times, unfortunately, it's very difficult to deal with it. Because if you're, let's say a woman who's raised, again, I'm not talking, let's ignore actually the traditional cultures. Obviously, if you're born in a very traditional, like say a Muslim culture or something like that, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to learn to, value female relations, female friendships above kissing the man's ass, because it's institutionalized, it's beaten in your brain that if you don't kiss ass, you don't survive. So it becomes a question of like, you don't have the chance to survive at all. So yeah. But even in like modern, let's say more westernized countries where you have women's rights and all that, a lot of women, unless they have power, unless they have money, they may not value a female friendship. And also, which leads me to another societal problem for why women don't have friends. It's simply because women don't have as much power in society. And I know this is going to sound very weird and maybe potentially depressing, but when you think about it, if you look at men developing friendships, to a large extent, the reason why men have friends and they benefit from having friends is because, men have power and status in society, so they benefit from one another's associations one way or another. And it's like also because men don't have to worry about their safety, so they can be more relaxed about friendships. So like a guy generally will not have to worry about, I don't know, his safety, not as much as a woman, let me put it like that, when he leaves his home, for instance, right? So men can just hang out together and be like, let's go out for fishing or whatever, enjoy themselves. But for two women to do the same thing, it would be comparatively more difficult and less rewarding at the same time, not just because they have to, have to deal with more risks, but also because of society and how it is structured, women are still kind of like pressured to prioritize men as a way to survive. You know what I mean? Like, this also gets me to another subject that I wanted to talk about at some point, because you hear a lot of like men say stuff, especially in these like MGTOW anti-feminist bullshit circles, where they will say things like, women are not interesting, they don't have hobbies or whatever. Well, the reason why women are not as interesting, they don't have hobbies, and also you hear Jordan Peterson saying that women are not focused on object-oriented sciences. The reason they're not focused on these things is, first of all, because they're heavily discriminated against when they do go for these fields. You can't tell me shit. I have an engineering degree. I know what I'm talking about. I was smarter than most of the guys in my class, and yet I never got not even half of the opportunities or encouragement that the men in my group got. Because the general society wants to see women prostituting themselves. They don't want to see pretty women, especially, gaining power and competence. So most of society is like going to look at a pretty woman, no matter how smart she is, and be like, why are you wasting your time I don't know, focusing on a career instead of getting a husband. So you don't get the same encouragement, you don't get the same appreciation. And on top of that, women are just threatened sometimes, like downright physically or somehow, by being discriminated against when you go to the workplace, deal with things like sexual harassment at work, not being paid the same salary for doing the same work as a man. There are all kinds of like subtle and not so subtle ways in which women are constantly being put down in society, and men make constant, assurance one way or another that women don't gain power, that they don't gain the same amount of power as a man. And because women don't have power, they do not have the same say in how society is being run. And subsequently, the friendship between two women is not going to be seen as strategically valuable as the friendship between two men. I don't know if I'm being super articulate about this. I maybe am not getting the best words to express my ideas. I have to admit, I have had a couple of drinks. But it is Friday night. Whatever, I won't dwell. But these are the general ideas, all right? And this is like, the fact that basically the bottom line is because we live in a very narcissistic environment. And again, I also don't want to sound like I'm entirely blaming men for this bullshit, right? Because it's not entirely men's fault. To a large extent, women are the ones who are the primary people who are responsible, because at the end of the day, it's their lives, right? It's their responsibility to wake up and decide, you know what, I'm going to stop listening to this bullshit media brainwashing, and I'm going to start valuing other women and prioritizing time with other women and building relationships with other women. But because of the climate that we live in, I would say worldwide, women are constantly pitted against one another, and a lot of women reach a state where they have like this overall paranoia about not trusting other women, And I put myself in this category, by the way. I have had like a lifelong frustration with not finding decent friends. Like when I was a kid, for instance, up until my teens or something, I actually tried, I tried really hard to make friends, and I was met with constant disappointment. And one of the things that happened to me was that, when I was a kid, even now, by the way, I'm overweight. I don't think of myself as particularly pretty. But when I was a kid, I was one of the fat kids, so I really was not pretty when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, I was like somehow deemed as not worthy to be friends with because I wasn't particularly pretty, and maybe I was a little bit weirder than average, because I don't know, I was a little bit weirder, to be honest. Like I didn't really care that much about, tea parties and doing cutesy stuff. Like I would have been more outdoorsy, for instance. So I remember as a kid, I felt like I had to try really hard to keep my friends happy. Like somehow I had to overcompensate for the fact that I wasn't cool, that I wasn't seen as one of the pretty girls, and I wasn't socially acceptable. And the consequence was that, I did have some friends, but they were not real friends. They were like friends who would stick around as long as they benefited somehow from me in a very material sense. But they weren't like genuine friendships, And when I got older and I started getting prettier, on the other hand, I had to deal with situations where I felt stabbed in the back by people that I thought I could trust. I'm talking about women especially, that I thought I could trust, even my own mother. I remember at one point when I lost weight in high school, all of a sudden acted weird towards me. Like all of a sudden she was like bitchier than usual because I started getting prettier, which is a very disgusting thing to do towards your own child, but I won't get into how insane my family is. Just to give you some examples, of the crap that women have to deal with, whereas as a guy, I don't think you have to deal with this stuff as much. I also think that it's becoming, the world in general is becoming more and more narcissistic, even to the point where men struggle with a lot of the same things. Because I used to think that, this is purely a female thing, but then I came across a video done by a guy where he actually talked about how hard it is for him to make friends, and he was talking about similar situations where, he had a girlfriend who cheated on him with a male friend and all this crap. So in many ways, the world is becoming more superficial and, narcissistic overall. That is true. And I'm sure that, in addition to chauvinism, there are also other things like the breakdown of spirituality, the fact that a lot of people are just materialistic and they only care about having a friend as long as they can benefit in a very real material sense from that person. So they no longer have like a spiritual guidance the way that people did when they lived in small communities and they were going to church every Sunday or any other religion, whatever. And they were like basically having a more spiritual perspective on life when they would actually look at other people as an entirety and think about what benefits they may get spiritually from maintaining a friendship, even when the person in question wasn't someone who was like very well connected or had a huge Instagram following. Obviously, Instagram didn't exist in the Middle Ages. But you know what I'm talking about, so there are multiple factors, I'm sure, that also add to the decrease in friendship. But I would say this thing about institutionalized chauvinism is a huge one. And again, I also think it's about women, becoming more aware of these things and learning not to immediately demonize other women and to see them as an enemy. I also think, unfortunately, for many women, the mistrust towards other women comes first and foremost from their own family systems, usually from their mother figures. Like for instance, when I was growing up, at least for most of my childhood, because I was fat and ugly, I think, I don't want to get too much into my childhood, but to a large extent, I was kind of like mama's little girl. If anything, I had a much worse relationship with my father, and I had a generally more negative view of men. So I think when I was growing up as a child and as a young woman, I had an idealized view of women. Like I always saw women in a better light by comparison to men. I always kind of saw women as, the better half somehow of the species. And it took me a long time to actually realize that this was damaging me when I came across, potentially toxic female examples. But what I found out is that for most women is the opposite of that. A lot of women, at least, maybe not most, but a lot of women that I have come across have very toxic mother figures, women who are very abusive, very narcissistic, and who basically taught them that other women are not to be trusted. And that's another, but see, here's the solution. The main solution, again, is self-reflection. So as a woman, you have to look at all these things. You have to look at, like, where are your attitudes about women coming from? Like, are they coming from your relationship to your mother, or maybe other female figures that you had around you when you were growing up that left a huge mark on you? And how do these relationships impact the way that you deal with women in general? And another thing that I will say is, and I will say this, like, I definitely think there is some truth to the fact that, women who are pretty have a much harder time having real friends. And again, the reason for this is all of the things that I have mentioned previously. The narcissism, the chauvinism, the sometimes maybe internalized misogyny, that's another thing. So a lot of these women who are very pretty are seen as competition, especially in very chauvinistic environments. And because we live in a world that, again, overemphasizes a woman's physical appearance as the only source of her value, a lot of women don't want to be, and quite rightfully so, they don't want to be made to feel invisible when they are hanging around with other more attractive women. But again, if you are in this position, you have to first and foremost try to be understanding as a woman, and don't immediately, and I understand, it's hard. It's really hard because society pressures you to buy into the Instagram culture of whoever gets most views is the most successful, the most valuable, whatever. But you have to, like, as women, this is the only way that we're going to get out of it, is by learning to trust one another and to not immediately be like, oh, I'm not gonna trust this person, or I'm not even gonna try to be polite to a woman because she looks like she is, very attractive and maybe she's arrogant or whatever. Sometimes these women might actually be more arrogant, but, a lot of the times I'm sure that it's not the case. A lot of the times I'm sure that it's just, other women don't even want to be friends with them because they automatically assume that maybe she has, behavioral problems. Maybe she's going to act arrogant or whatever, so on and so forth. But I've definitely seen this. Like, I've seen this also with my mother and my grandmother, for instance. They were really both very attractive. And one thing that I will say is that I don't remember either of them having very strong female friendships, And in fact, my mother, especially, I remember her kind of saying that she felt betrayed by, one of her childhood friends. And this is not an uncommon story. I know this other woman that I used to talk about and talk with, and I also mentioned her in the video where I talked about men with daddy issues. She was the one who had, the boyfriend who dumped her because the entourage did not approve of her. If you watch my video, you know what I'm talking about. So this woman was very, very attractive, above average attractive, nice body, nice face. She was in some kind of a Miss competition, so she was in some kind of a beauty pageant. That's what I'm trying to say, not Miss competition. Yeah. Beauty pageant. All right. And she actually told me that, she had this friend ever since she was a child that she really trusted. And this woman, she later found out through common acquaintances, was bad-mouthing her on a regular basis. And, she was talking about how betrayed she felt and all this stuff. And this is not an uncommon scenario that you will hear, especially from women who are above average attractive, where they trust other women and end up getting stabbed in the back. And while sometimes it might actually be something that is wrong with them, a lot of the times it's not the case, So I'm no doubt some women who are very attractive do become narcissistic, again, to a large extent because society places so much value on the outside appearance. I mean, you have the Amber Heards of the world who I'm sure, think that they are much better than the rest of the world. Just because they're attractive. But then a lot of women are not like that. A lot of women do have a more, they have more dimension to them than just what is right on the surface. But society and other women don't give them a chance to, showcase their other qualities and to actually prove how good of a friend they are because of this pressure and because of the fact that, a lot of women just don't want to be seen with a more attractive woman. And again, this is also a consequence of chauvinism. It's not even because women personally would have a problem with being seen with more attractive women. It's because other men will automatically only stare at the woman who is the most attractive and make the rest of the women feel completely invisible, So, yeah, again, I don't want to sound like I'm entirely blaming men because, like I said, it's not entirely men's fault or something. But to a large extent, it is about this chauvinism and also probably internalized misogyny. So overall, what I think the solution is, like I said, is self-awareness. I do think it's also about, I would say just investing in female friendships, and think about how things are going to work out. Unfortunately, what I have seen and what I have heard from a lot of women is that they end up trusting women who betray them, one way or another. And unfortunately, some women are just not emotionally mature enough to understand these things, So if that's the case, then there's no point wasting your time on them. Because some women, it's like, again, they're fully plugged into the matrix and they don't even question why they feel the way that they feel or why they do what they do, So a lot of women, if they are fully brainwashed by the media, they're going to be, not questioning why they mistrust other women or why they have a hard time, being around a woman that is seen as pretty or something like that. Yeah, and also because of the media, I think a lot of women really just don't focus on their own lives, which is really sad but true. And I don't know if this is like a general thing or it's especially true in Eastern Europe, and I'm sure other places where women are, discriminated against on a regular basis. But what I have seen, for instance, in my society is that, especially in your 30s, like very few women are outside of their family circle anymore. You know what I mean? It's like either they're married, in which case it's like they don't exist for society, like all their energy goes towards their spouse and their children, or if they're not married, they're desperate to get married. In which case, again, their energy is entirely focused on men and how are they going to get the next man and all this shit. And I, as a woman who, by the way, has just turned 35 this month, it's like, for me, for instance, it's really boring. Like, I'm not interested in talking about men. And it's not like, I don't know, I think that relationships are not important, romantic relationships are not important. But I also think that there's more to life than just relationships and just men and all this shit. But because women are so deeply rooted in the matrix and they fall into the constant programming that tells them that a man is the center of your life and that if you're single, your life is worthless, and that if you're not attractive, that your life has no value, but I mean, that's not how I see it. I think that women could create, societies within societies where they actually learn to take care of one another. I mean, look at the Mosuo communities, for instance, in China. I'm not saying that it's ideal, and also not pushing for the idea that men should be wiped out of the species, but I also think women shouldn't suffer on account of men. So if men don't, like, man the fuck up and learn what women need, I don't think they should be tolerated with their, ignorance and their destructive ways. So I think women could create communities, where they support one another, where maybe they have kids even, through boyfriends or through sperm donors or whatever, and learn to create communities where they support one another and all this stuff, and where men would have little to no say in the whole thing, And again, not saying it's ideal, not saying that it's like something that should be embraced worldwide, but I also think that life is too short to be wasted on men, especially if you don't find like a worthy man, you know what I mean? So I personally have never bought into the idea that, the purpose of life is about finding a man and settling down. Because, again, I won't get too philosophical here, but if that were the purpose, I mean, it makes no sense, first and foremost. It makes no sense because, like, God or the creator or whoever you want to call, I don't know, whoever designed the universe, created women who cannot have children, for instance. So to say that the purpose of the universe is reproduction, for women at least, is, and this also flies in the face of a lot of organized religions that claim that women exist to reproduce. But if you say that women exist to reproduce, it's basically like saying that God fucked up at the implementation of his own project. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, if God created women just to reproduce and then created women who cannot reproduce, how do you explain that other than God is incompetent? You know what I mean? But again, won't get into too much about how religion has everything backwards and especially is used to gaslight and sometimes even abuse women. I actually thought about doing a separate video again about religion. I said this before and I think I will do it at some point about Abrahamic religions and how they treat women and all that. But, the bottom line is that society, the media, all this brainwashes women constantly that their worth comes from being attached to a man, and that if you don't have a man, you should waste every waking moment trying to impress a man, right? Trying to get a man as quickly as possible. So there's consequently far less energy for women to focus on other things, like, I don't know, their hobbies, their interests, their girlfriends, And a lot of this, like I said, so the solution to a lot of this is just conscious effort, basically. It is what it is. Women deciding that, what, we've had it with having our sense of value and self-worth being attached to whether a man finds us attractive or not. and consequently building our whole lives around how other men see us and all this crap. So pretty much this is what I wanted to say. And yeah, it hasn't been a very organized speech. But these have been like the main ideas. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe at some point if I get a lot of questions or something, or if I get other ideas, maybe I will do a follow-up video or like a part 2. But this is pretty much the main ideas that I wanted to share about this topic. So again, if you have liked it, if you would like to see other videos like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, click on the notifications bell, also comment in the comment section, again, with any feedback you would like to share or ideas for future topics that you would like me to cover. Also, if you're interested in becoming a member, you can check out the introductory part of the video where I talk about what the membership options are, what each tier entails. Also, if you're interested in a private astrology consultation, you can check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there so you can email me for a full list of reading options with the prices. And last but not least, I have a tarot channel, and I will be linking that in the video description as well. So if you're curious about tarot, if you like it, you might want to check out my channel, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you in my next video.